Everyone has their own way of setting doors, and there's a million different ways of doing it. But this is one way that I do it, and I just wanted to share. The first thing that I do is I verify the top of the door. I want to make sure that the top of our jamb lines up with the top of the jambs in the rest of the room so that all of your trim lines are consistent. That's why I have a line that I've put here. That's the top of the jamb. Lines up with everything else in the rest of the room. I also put a line here where the top hinge is located just to help me locate where some of my shims might go. And of course, this is an old house, and so it is not plumb. We want to just verify if we're going to be setting our door plumb, but our studs are out of plumb. We just want to make sure we have enough consistent gap between the jamb and the framing so that we can install shims. Now in this case, we're doing a double door, right? We're setting the jamb to the doors. We want the doors set to each other, and then we adjust the jamb to where the doors are sitting. It's the same with doing a single door. When that single door closes against the jamb, you want that door to seat against the jamb all the way around. So you set the jamb to that door. One of the things I like to do is measure the size of the top of my jamb. The full distance is 61.5. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a block right here, a solid block, and I'm going to nail it in, but I have to make sure that this block isn't too big and it's throwing my jamb so far over that it's impeding on that, and I can't shim on that side on that stud. The main thing that I think of when I'm setting a door is I'm thinking of all the planes. The door face, I'm thinking of all the planes of the doors vertically and horizontally. Okay, so on the floor, you'll see that we have our spacer block, which gives us our distance to the top of our jamb where we need it to keep it in plane with the rest of the room. Then we have our shims at the bottom and our shims at the top. I've leveled these so they're perfectly plumb. And the next step that we're going to do now is to put the jamb into the rough framing. Every home is different, every wall is different, every door is unique. The most important thing I would say to setting any door is to remember that the door slab has to seat nicely against the jamb. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the door slabs and just kind of hang them on the hinges. And so what it'll do is it'll put pressure here, but it'll give us an idea of the reveals of where we're at. So we can always put shims in there to pull our door over and then up. And this is where we sort of get into the adjustment, because your doors are what you're setting the jamb to. You're not setting the doors to the jamb, you're setting the jamb to the doors. Okay, so this is just the final micro adjustments, and what I like to do is I like to put screws through the hinges in order to do that, and those screws will become a permanent placement, and that's what's holding your door slabs. And the goal is, especially with a French door, is to ensure that your gap is consistent between the doors and that your gap is also consistent, what's called your reveal, between the door slabs and the jambs on either side. Also compounding that to make sure that the doors line up at the top. So one door might be higher than the other or lower than the other by using the screws. For instance, if we're too tight at the top and one door is a little lower, we take the lower door and we tighten the screw in. What that does is it raises the door, but it also pulls the top over in that direction. You got to understand, as soon as you adjust one screw, you've got to go back and check and see how much that moved. It doesn't take much to move reveals around, so you may have to adjust a screw or a shim several times. We're going to adjust the jambs a little bit at the top and use shims and nails to make everything consistent and look good. So all I'm doing is just making sure that my gap is consistent all the way down. And so just by nailing this, you can move it one way, or the shim can move it back. You can use screws, you can hand drive these. You see how tight that jamb is right there? Now the doors line up really nice, but this top of this jamb needs to move over that way. So I just kind of loosen the shims here. I'm going to take my flat bar here. So I'm just taking the top of the jamb only and moving it over. See that? Okay, so the last thing that I like to do is put my shims in the head of the door jamb, because there's a couple of screws here that go in. There's a lot of working motion in here. There's a little ball that's installed at the top here. And so it just adds that extra strength, especially if you have to chisel this out a little bit more, you've got something to pound against. A lot of times we do like to use a saw when we're cutting shims. In this case, we used razor blades because that blue tape that's around the corners of the walls, that's because it's lath and plaster. And if I use a saw, it kind of blows a lot of air around and everything else, and I want to keep the dust down because that's got lead in it, and I don't want to create dust in the room. So I don't think there really is any one right way. I think we all developed our own habits and how we install doors. So I just wanted to show some of the ways in which I do it, and I'd be happy to hear how other guys do it as well.